Two, one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I am your host for this evening, and today I'm going to bring to you guys another film in the let's see, the comic book, the non-comic book, non-superhero.
Non-superhero comic book adaptation, specifically Western comics.
There we go. And we bring to you a film that was loosely adapted from Alan Moore's 1999 graphic novel that was serialized from 1989 on forwards, but finally published in 1999 by Top Shelf Productions.
And drawn by Eddie Campbell. And it was From Hell, based on the Jack the Ripper murders. And it was published in its entirety by Top Shelf, but serialized by a bunch of different other publishers kind of throughout its long, intermittent run. The last movie we talked about was Scott Pilgrim vs. the World from Canada. That comic series from Canada. Now we got the UK. So we're getting out of American shores there, and this is Scott Pilgrim was about as Canadian as maple syrup. This story, the Jack the Ripper murder, is about as British as pudding. The original conception for the story was actually at the centennial of the murders. So started to be conceived around 1988, or researched and implemented around that time. And lasted, like we said, throughout that 10-year period of serialization. Then it gets adapted into this film, which
it's directed by a couple of brothers called the Hughes Brothers, which would be Albert Hughes and Alan Hughes, in 2001, and it stars Johnny Depp, Heather Graham, Ian Holm, and a bunch of other characters. That
you can't say a bunch of other for Robbie Coltrane. You got to say Robbie Coltrane.
Robbie Coltrane.
I think. Well, this is even pre-Hagrid period for.
Actually,
it's a month before the first. Nope.
Oh, no, it's the same year.
Same year. A month before the first Harry Potter film came out. So it is pre-Harry Potter.
Yep.
So
technically.
Yes, more than technically.
Well, and technically speaking, just real quick on a technicality, the Hughes Brothers are actually from Detroit, Michigan. So we had a Brit come over to make an American film, and then we got some Americans going over to make a British film.
a quote-unquote American film that is still about as Canadian as maple syrup. Right. So, but yeah, this story, this real-life murder case is about as British could be. But this film does deviate pretty heavily from historical fact. The graphic novel on which it is based has some deviations from historical facts. A lot of the ones that it makes are very, very deliberate for
historical. I would say yes, it does deviate from the historical aspect of it. Yeah. But
it deviates heavily from the graphic novel too, which the graphic novel does stick to history much more closely than this does, even though it too makes a lot of suppositions that are not intending to be 100% realistic.
I would say, as far as the controversies go, it interlaces a lot of the controversies really well.
Well, the conspiracy theory that goes along with it.
Correct. The conspiracy. This movie was more to me about satisfying the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, which we need to be clear. So, people know the Jack the Ripper case. 5 murders of prostitutes in the Whitechapel area of London in 1888.
5 main ones, 11 in total.
Yeah, 5, the canonical 5, the ones that are more or less confirmed to have been from the same killer. the conspiracy theory that the graphic novel and this film run with, it predates the graphic novel. It was from a 1970s book called Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, which alleged that Queen Victoria's personal physician, Sir William Wythe Gull, was the Ripper and was doing so for Masonic reasons and for trying to cover up an illicit love child from Prince Albert and a Catholic woman. And that conspiracy theory has been pretty widely debunked, and but it predated the graphic novel. Alan Moore deliberately took it, knowing that it was not true, but he did it as a way to show how the society in which the Jack the Ripper killings were committed, that it contributed very heavily to the murders themselves and to the results of it, the hysteria that surrounded it. It's more of kind of a sociological illustration, whereas this movie touches on that stuff, but it is structured as much more of a conventional whodunit.
And it's set around 1888, when the murders exactly were from like August to November of 1888. And but before we go into first impressions, let's see what IMDb says about the film, and then we'll go into first impressions, and then we'll go into a general discussion about the plot and the characters and all that. So, in Victorian-era London, a troubled clairvoyant police detective investigates the murders of Jack the Ripper. So, on first impressions, I'm going to go with you, Septim. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your first impression of this film?
Also, first off, since I'm going to have to leave out of here probably before the discussion ends, I'll make sure to leave the information as to the next week's films in the private message, but we have a lot of fun stuff to look forward to.
Good times.
But as far as the first time, I remember hearing about this early on, and my best friend at the time had hated this film. Like, he loathed it. Like really loathed it. And I never really got to see it until probably the mid-2000s. And I didn't really hate it. And I was more into Johnny Depp at the time. I was trying to see most of his films. That was before a lot of stuff came out, and a lot of bad films that had come back to back to back. But I was interested in, like I say, anything that Johnny Depp was involved in. I really didn't like this film as much. Not hate it, because hate it definitely is too strong a word for this. I would say more just the pace was so slow. It felt like a slog to get through a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I admit, even this time, I nodded off a couple of times throughout it and had to rewind a number of times to get through it. I think I spent probably about twice as much time on the film than the film's runtime to get it done.
Unlike the graphic novel, which you've said you haven't read, which again highly recommend you do. Unlike the graphic novel, if you didn't like the slow pacing of the film, it's like, well, the film does not have anywhere near the substance of the graphic novel with which to justify that slow pace or to keep your interest. So you are not in the wrong on that front, I don't think.
In this case, on this particular film, I feel like the film and the graphic novel are two like entirely different entities, and if you treat them as such, then you can enjoy either film separately from each other.
I think you'd have to, because again, this has so little to do with the graphic novel that it's kind of ridiculous. Plus the fact that, again, the central conspiracy theory that this is built off of predated the graphic novel. So really all that this has to do with it is the title. That's pretty much it.
But anyways, let us continue with first impressions. Let's go over to you, Jake. What was your first impression of this film?
Well, first, Brandon, were you able to finish? Did you get everything?
Yeah, that was my
first
impression.
I just wanted to make sure.
I didn't really have much of one.
Okay.
I do read the graphic novel, though.
With this one, and I have to admit, I want to read it eventually myself. I want to read more Alan Moore. I just,
it's well worth it.
Yeah, I need to. It's very dense, and I knew I didn't have time to get through a 500-page dense novel of his. But anyway, this one, I could not tell you what my first. Exactly what the circumstances were. I cannot. I feel like I was aware of it when it came out. Like I might have heard talk of it being a graphic novel. I might have heard it was about Jack the Ripper. I don't know. I was sort of, I kind of like Brandon. I went through a phase where I was like all about Johnny Depp as an actor, but a series of poor choices on his part, professionally and otherwise. Yeah, I feel like the man can redeem himself, but he needs to start trying to. But
his day will come, I think.
He has a lot of skill, and at this stage in his career, he was doing some good stuff, some intriguing stuff. And I feel like I was kind of aware of that at the time, but I was not like, nothing about this film screamed to me, I need to go see this. And I really don't think I did. I did not see it in theaters. I don't remember when I did. But one of the reasons for all the Hagrid jokes is that the film does star Robbie Coltrane, and it is just before the first Harry Potter film came out. And I am almost sure. I did not see this until after Chamber of Secrets came out. So at that point, I thought of Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid. And so seeing him clean shaven and somewhat foul mouthed, it was a little different. And I thought that was very amusing to me. And he is a solid actor. He had a lot of recurring role on Black Adder back in the day. You know, he's done some stuff over the years. He's a solid actor. And Ian Holm, I already knew at this point from The Sweet Hereafter, which was a wonderful film. And I had, and Heather Graham, I enjoyed in the Austin Powers movies, and I think I'd seen her in a couple other good ones.
Nice.
Overall, it's a solid cast. And overall, I was, when I finally got around to it, I think I was put off by how dark and gritty and grimy and bloody the film is. It's not my cup of tea exactly, but I like historical dramas that take, as you said, take a thought and run with it, whether it's accurate or not. They did root the film pretty heavily in accuracies, and they used that to build a very fantastical story out of it. And so it does scratch that itch. I like historical fiction a lot, and I think that this one did a tolerable job of doing that. I did not find it glacially slow. I thought it was slow, but you know.
Do read the graphic novel, because it will scratch that itch a lot more thoroughly.
I get there eventually, but basically overall, I think this was probably my, if I had to guess, third time watching this, and I haven't seen it for a few years, so it was nice to revisit it. And it's really, at the end, it's nice.
I come at this film from a different angle. I did not read the graphic novel, though I knew it came from a graphic a novel, and I was really into Johnny Depp films at the time, and the thing is the angle that I'm coming at this from is I'd seen The Lord of the Rings before I saw this film, but I'd seen The Emperor's New Clothes with Ian Holmes in it before I saw this film. And so whenever I saw Ian Holmes with his hands clasped behind his back, I'm thinking Napoleon, you know? So, especially when he was talking to Johnny Depp and he had his hands back behind his back up when he was talking to him on the chalkboard and shit. But anyways, I really enjoyed this film. I care less how factual this film is. But I would have enjoyed this film a little bit more if it had been more factual instead of bringing about a love story between the two main characters, although they had to Hollywood it up a little bit in order for it to be not as gruesome as the bloody details of this so-called murder. And I do like the controversy that surrounds even though
the conspiracy.
Yes, I love the conspiracy theories of this murder. It is one of the largest, most well-known serial killer situations where they didn't find the killer.
Yeah, well, to be fair, so this was probably one of, if not the earliest models for what we think of as the serial killer today, and that was when modern police work was still in its infancy. And so you didn't have DNA evidence, the fingerprints hadn't been, I think wasn't that Herbert Hoover who really got that going in a serious, systematic way?
Well, this was Scotland Yard for you.
It was, but that's what I mean. It's like they were very, very early.
And Scotland Yard policemen have always been televised as these bumbling idiots, these Keystone cops, and even in this particular film, the police captain that's in charge, he's like, no one. No self-respectable gentleman would ever do this.
Could have done this, yeah. Which again, that's very, very Hollywood, very oversimplified from the real guy, and also how he's presented in the graphic novel, where he's presented a lot more accurate to who the real guy was. Who the real police chief? He was a Freemason in real life, but he also was very cautious about the fact that Whitechapel at that period was a hotbed of crime and murder and prostitution and anti-Semitism, and he was very concerned about the anti-Semitic implications of saying that, which they give that line to Aberline in this, but the real guy was concerned about the possible anti-Semitic backlash if they implied that the killer might be a Jew on scant evidence. But yeah, they never ever identified Jack the Ripper in his time, and there's still no conclusions about who Jack the Ripper was. Although
there was a documentary maybe a couple years ago that may have supposedly tied it to a butcher.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure on that nature, but they think and feel like they've found but that's neither here nor there. So let's take a look at the characters involved. I
didn't give my first.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I saw this film recently for this episode, but I'd read the graphic novel like early 2020. pre-pandemic 2020. And I am a massive, massive fan of Alan Moore, have been since Watchmen days and V for Vendetta, which I read when I was like in high school. Finally, was so glad to jump into this one. It's funny because Alan Moore is not a conspiracy guy in real life, and yet he masterfully uses conspiracies in his fiction work and does so very intelligently and very insightfully, because it's not ever about, oh, isn't it wacky and weird that this is a conspiracy that could be real. It's what does it mean about society and that kind of stuff. And that's really what his graphic novel is all about. Like I said before we started, the graphic novel is structured so unbelievably differently because it is not a whodunit at all. You know right away that, spoilers, that Sir William Wythe Gull in the fictional world of this story is the Ripper. You know that right away. And so it's not
I didn't
about
know that right away going into this particular film.
That's what I mean, is that the way that they structure it here is a classical Hollywood whodunit. They try to make it a twist and stuff. The graphic novel, you know explicitly that that's who it is. It's more about why is he doing it? What does it mean about society? And they totally half-ass his motivations in this film compared to what they are in the graphic novel. The graphic novel, they're able to go into very explicit detail about why he's doing it, all of the kind of Masonic / occult / male supremacist reasons why he's doing it. None of his motivations make any sense in the film adaptation. And the whole thing really falls apart relative to where it's supposed to line up.
See, I disagree with that, but we'll get to that.
Well, but point being, for impressions, like, I adore the graphic novel. I kind of knew that this was going to be a piss poor adaptation because Alan Moore adaptations tend to be pretty piss poor. Now, it on a script level, it absolutely is a piss poor adaptation. I do think as a film, it's visually very slick, very well edited, well shot. It has a good visual aesthetic to it. It's nowhere near as gory as the graphic novel is, or as the real life case was. But it is well made. It's well executed overall. If you did not know the graphic novel, if you did not know the real history behind the thing, and you just wanted to see a movie, you could do a lot worse, but I do think it kind of peters out towards the end in terms of just motivation and logic and that kind of stuff. And especially when you compare it to its source material, it's doomed in the water, but we'll get there.
So the film ends up starting out with Mary Kelly going through the East End of London and what is considerably called the Whitechapel district.
Yeah.
And she ends up coming across. And what's funny is that the original Ripper murders, the victims, I don't really think that they hung out together at all. They were separate.
I don't know.
They were not known to be as close as they are in this film.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, and again, according to that conspiracy theory, which again predates the graphic novel, it's all about trying to cover up a illicit baby born out of wedlock that is the true heir to the throne of England and would shame the crown and all that stuff. And so therefore, these women were witnesses to it and that sort of stuff. That's how they link them together in that conspiracy theory, which again has been discredited. But that's how they're able to link these otherwise rather disparate people together. It's possible, I'm sure, given that they were prostitutes working in the same area, they might have come across each other, but maybe not as explicitly connected as they are in the conspiracy theory.
Correct. And among these characters that we eventually meet are the other ladies of the night that we know as prostitutes.
Mary Kelly, Polly Nichols, Anne Chapman, Liz Stride, and what was the
Catherine
other one?
Eddowes.
Catherine
Yeah,
Eddowes.
Catherine Eddowes. Yeah.
And ultimately, we get a story where Annie Chapman, I believe, is the girl that seems to be have a husband that is of royalty, which
Anne Crook, married to a wealthy painter named Albert, except that we know that it is actually Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, the son of Queen Victoria.
So ultimately, we do have a first victim, and that I believe is Annie.
Well, no, Anne gets locked up in an
That's right.
asylum and lobotomized because, well, and that part is correct to both graphic novel and film, that because the initial plan is to merely make her disappear and to lobotomize her to shut her up, but then because the prostitutes, the other canonical five, because they are in trouble with gang members, which again was very common for
the Nichols boys.
Very common for prostitutes at the time. Because they're in trouble with them for money and stuff, they get the idea, oh, we're gonna blackmail Walter Sickert, the painter who's the friend of Prince Albert. We're gonna blackmail them to get the money, and then that's what prompts Queen Victoria to be like, silence these women. And of course, our dear Jackie Boy, aka Sir William Gull, takes that with a little bit too much gusto, and goes about his work.
Before I leave out, because I'm going to leave in just a few minutes, I did want to speak to the lobotomy scene in there. Just as I used to actually study that as a odd fascination of old psychiatric techniques. And with the lobotomy, it is rare that you actually see a movie at least try to show how it was done.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of interesting things about that sort of procedure. That was the idea. Of course, the procedure was, you're unruly, let's settle you down, and yes, that would do it. Matter of fact, they used to even prescribe it in the early days for, oh, your child is misbehaving, just give them a lobotomy, they'll behave.
For kids,
it used to be given out just like contraceptives.
Yeah.
But a lot of the accuracy is still not quite the case, because usually with lobotomies, unless the doctors were seasoned and well versed in it, if they had done it full accuracy, Jake wouldn't have been able to watch the movie. And because literally the procedure was at the point where unseasoned people would be vomiting because of just the general cracks and.
I believe that the general aspect of the lobotomy, at least pictured in this film, was depicted in a way where the actual procedure was part of the Masonic entryway into
they put it as a like a part of the conspiracy theories.
Which again, that's a lot of the.
And with that, I do apologize for running over, but I won't be running over anybody very shortly. But in any case, just as I said, I feel like this movie itself, as a movie, has some intriguing elements, but the reliance on the conspiracy theories, the slow pacing, and so on, to me, does not lend it as an interesting film to me. I felt like there were better films for Jack the Ripper, but I also feel like if you want to go with conspiracies and cultist type things, Eyes Wide Shut is a much better way of executing that. But in any case, I do thank y'all for letting me have my little speak on that, and I wish y'all well, and I'll see you all on the next week.
Nighty-night.
Right.
Nighty-night.
Do read the graphic novel, though. You'll love it.
Definitely on the list.
Right.
Alrighty. So, being said, I think this is where we should talk about Mary Shelley as a character. What do you all think about her?
Mary
Mary
Kelly.
Shelley?
Or Mary Kelly?
Mary
Kelly.
Shelley. Now that would be something. Now that's early 1800s, not late 1800s. But
Mary Kelly's a likable enough character in the film. She's kind of the center focal point for the as they call them, unfortunate women that are featured in this film. That's the more polite term they use. I think Robbie Coltrane calls them bangtails, and some of the others have much more
illustrative names for them.
Exactly. Kelly comes across as a pretty decent individual. She tries to she's looking out for herself, but she does want to not just turn a blind eye to others as well. And you can see, and Heather Graham has got a sort of an offbeat charm to her, and she definitely was a fun focal point, I think, for that particular group of characters.
But she cannot. I love Heather Graham, but she can't do a Cockney accent to save her life. Apparently,
not the best at it.
Apparently, the real Mary Kelly, which the graphic novel, the illustrations of everyone apparently are accurate to the way that they looked in real life. It's not surprising because you can draw it,
Should she have been doing a Cockney accent though? She was supposed to be Irish, wouldn't she?
Actually, I think you're right, but like she can't. The point being that
she's American. They could have gotten a local actress. Yeah.
Well, they could have, and they could have had her work at it a lot more.
Yeah.
But point being that the real person / the version in the graphic novel was apparently pretty good looking for her time. She wasn't like a Heather Graham like knockout or anything, but apparently she was one of the better looking girls there.
She's
supporting
from Dave's neck of the woods. She's from Milwaukee.
Oh, there you go. Well, the girls that she's surrounded by, the other canonical 5, they were apparently not. The way that they look in the film is actually close to. Apparently, the way that they looked in real life, they were not knockouts at all. They were kind of, they had missing teeth and that kind of stuff. So they got it down to where Mary Kelly was going to be the more pretty of the bunch. But the real person and also the version in the graphic novel was like a pretty bad alcoholic, which is not surprising. So it's one of those things where, again, you see like the Hollywoodification of a story that's a lot uglier than what they present here.
Oh, okay. Now that hits close to home for me in a bad way.
What?
The woman that played Dark Annie, Katrin Cartledge, died at age 41 the year after this film came out for complications from pneumonia and septicemia. I came really close to going down that road myself. So that's
kind of eerie.
Yeah, but that sucks for her. But yeah, the timing of that. But yeah, so Katrin Cartledge was Dark Annie, and then who else we got here? Leslie Sharp was Kate Eddowes. Polly Nichols was one of them, right? Liz Stroud is Susan Lynch.
The other women in here, they do tend to run together in a way that they don't in the graphic novel. They have, partially because you get to spend a lot more time with them, but they do have. Now, I do really love the scene where they're all just drinking around the table and they're trying to get a handle on what all is happening and stuff like that. Is true to the spirit of the graphic novel, and it's one of those scenes that you're like, okay, as piss poor of an adaptation as this is, they do get a few things down, and like that was a scene where I was like, yeah, they got that down, even though it was only like one scene that there should have been a lot more of those around all throughout. Plus,
And
go ahead.
Anne, what was her name? Anne Crook.
Yeah.
Is played by Joanna Page, who I recognized her from her accent, actually, from her voice. She had a role in Love Actually. She's actually not an unattractive woman either. But she's a charming actress. I've only seen her in those two things, I think. But that was what happened to her in the film. That was ugh. Brandon's probably right. At least they toned it down to make it, but still, that was still a horrifying fate. I mean, geez.
And be warned there, Jake, in the graphic novel, because it's drawn and obviously there's no limit to your budget of gore or anything like that.
Right.
Now it is drawn, and it's not really in a photorealistic style or anything, but the graphic novel, when it gets violent, it gets really violent, like really fucking gory.
You know the reason it's not at the top of my list.
Well, but again, but it's speaking true to the fact that the actual murders were extremely gory too.
Oh, yeah.
Before the first murder actually begins, we get Robbie Coltrane in his character as a detective to the Scotland Yard district in Whitechapel, and we have Johnny Depp, who plays Inspector Frederick Aberline, which I believe that's the real name of the lead detective of the original murder case. So
it is now notable thing here. Difference between the graphic novel / real life also. So the real life Frederick Aberline was middle-aged, he was fat, he was kind of balding, he was married, he was not a drug addict of any kind, didn't have a death wish or anything, did not have visions of any kind. What they did do here was they kind of merged the real life Frederick Aberline with apparently another real person who does factor into the story, but the real life Robert James Leeds, who is a fraudulent psychic acting as a spiritual advisor to Queen Victoria. So they kind of merged two characters into one, and made him into Johnny Depp, which again, it's one of those things where it's like, just give him another name if you're gonna make him that different of a person. But I do think that Johnny Depp, that he can do that accent he can do very well, and he's proven that time and time again. I think as his own character, he does that kind of character well, and he plays that kind of character well in multiple movies. You can see the seeds of what would eventually become Sweeney Todd. But again, it's like, that's not who the real Frederick Aberline was at all.
Interestingly, you're saying he was an older individual.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting that before Johnny Depp, they went to Sean Connery, who would go on to do an Alan Moore movie that was widely panned and often considered to be one of the reasons he retired from acting.
That's right. What's so weird, though, is that Robbie Coltrane, he looks more like the real Frederick Aberline than Johnny Depp does. And apparently, Alan Moore, who hasn't watched any of the adaptations of his work. But he apparently criticized the replacement of his gruff version of Frederick Aberline with an absinthe swilling dandy.
Yeah, I heard that.
And he basically said that the hairstyle that Johnny Depp had would have gotten him made fun of relentlessly in Scotland Yard at the time, which I could totally buy.
Well, one thing I wanted to say before we got into more of the Aberline character is Annie Crook, when she was making love with her Albert. That particular scene reminded me of another scene from a Roman Polanski movie that had Johnny Depp in it 2 years before this, The Ninth Gate.
I remember that one.
because in the very end of the film, the female of the story was making love with Johnny Depp in exactly the same way on his way into hell.
As you do.
Yes, and then of course that is a notable scene because they're doing their thing, and then they're both manhandled away by the special forces or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the and again, I did love Robbie Coltrane's line or something like, "You don't fuck with special forces, they fuck with you."
Yeah.
But and then what was the guy's name? Kidney. I mean, that's given the what the movie is about. That's an ominous name for someone on that side.
Yeah. Which now it's one of those things where when I read the graphic novel, I was expecting a whodunit structure, largely because Alan Moore's other big conspiratorial story, Watchmen, was a mystery in that respect, among many other things. But it was a mystery there. And the graphic novel from Hell is not a murder mystery at all because you know exactly who it is. This is a much more conventional murder mystery, but I will give them credit that in spite of that difference, they do a good job throughout the film of providing a lot of possible people that the Ripper could be. And it does, again, structurally, it's totally different, but it is in service of the larger theme of the story, which is that the Alan Moore's whole thesis was that the Jack the Ripper murders they coincided with a lot of events that would later formulate much of what would become the 20th century. And so in that respect, the ways in which these false rippers get shown helps to kind of further that theme, just in a way that's not really quite the way that Alan Moore intended, but it's at least kind of on message.
Most definitely. And so the first murder ends up happening, which apparently Inspector Aberline has predicted it. Somewhat predicted in his dream.
His absent
sequences.
Vision.
Yeah, chasing the dragon, as it were.
Which again, no basis in the graphic novel or fact at all, but in and of itself, I am a fan of my trippy dream sequences.
And what do you think of these trippy dream sequences that he seems to have about the alleged victims?
Well, I'm a fan of those in general. I think that they tend to lend themselves to some good visual possibilities.
Okay, but in this particular film, what do you think about them?
Well, unnecessary relative to the way that things should progress. But again, I think as a visual exercise, you do get some really cool ways of realizing some ideas.
Okay. What do y'all think about the ways in which the victims were killed?
I think that they were more or less accurate to the way that they actually happened. I do think that the grape stem, that I don't think actually happened, and that I thought was a rather obvious through line to try to link these killings together. Kind of an unnecessary one. Now, I know that in the graphic novel, he does lure some of the people in with grapes and stuff, which were kind of a luxury item, I guess, relative to what most of them could have afforded. I did think that was a kind of unnecessary through line that would have, had that been there in real life, I imagine that would have given them much more of an explicit link than they necessarily had. But that, of course, is trying to fit it into a conspiracy theory and all that stuff. The graphic novel does play up the fact that the police chief is a Freemason, and they're going for the conspiracy theory version of what a Freemason is. So they're steeping it much more explicitly in occultism than what is actually present in real life. But they're playing that up very deliberately, and they're making it a kind of top-down cover-up kind of thing.
One of the things that I found interesting about this film is the doctor that was in the morgue. He was a little bit of a character. I remember him from acting as in Frank Herbert's Dune on Sci-Fi as the House Harkonnen dude. That played, but every time he had to throw up every time that an organ was removed, because Johnny Depp's character as Aberline, he was like, "Didn't you notice that her organs or several organs were removed?" And he was like,
which now I think police autopsies were still pretty much in their infancy at the time. And plus it was the Victorian age, so any kind of mention of anything remotely sexual, even after death, was still pretty, worthy of being squeamish about.
Right.
Okay.
Those silly people.
Moving along on the plot, what do you think about the Nichols characters, the gang, the gang guy that ends up extorting the girls for money? I thought he was an interesting character. I thought that a little knife that he could just suddenly come out with and then suddenly make it disappear.
Yeah, they were pretty
cool.
Unsavory characters,
yes.
Deliberately so. Because guess what? There were a lot of very, very real unsavory characters all throughout Whitechapel.
Well, and the first two victims in the original Jack the Ripper case, those were supposedly allegedly gang related to the East End gang. So,
and it does kind of make me wonder, like this. I don't know if anybody's proposed this theory, because they've said, that they have said that there, was a singular killer and stuff. I've actually kind of wondered if those killings really were done by one person, not like multiple people, as in like, oh, it was a coordinated thing. More so of like, because I know that there were a lot of murders of prostitutes that happened before the Canonical Five, and even more that happened after. So it did kind of make me wonder if those ones, just for whatever reason, struck a chord with people, and they kind of took these killings that perhaps were unrelated and they kind of strung them together, which both the film and graphic novel hint at the fact that these killings did provide a tremendous amount of hysteria and public spectacle that kind of captured the British imagination at the time, up to and including people sending in a lot of phony leads and a lot of phony accounts of them having been the Ripper and all that stuff, which further clouded the investigation and made it hard for them to sort fact from fiction. And that's why, like the From Hell letter, the Dear Boss letter, the this and that, Dear Mr. Lusk, that whole thing. That's why those stuck out, partially because they had some consistency and because one of them had the kidney and that kind of stuff. So those did stand out among the rest. But both adaptations of this story touched on the fact that the lines between fact and fiction, especially when it's something that captures the imagination, those lines get heavily blurred. And that's actually a big theme of Alan Moore's in general, that the realms between fact and fiction are porous and semi-permeable. And there's a line that, unfortunately, because the character of Robert James Lee's, because he's not in there, they couldn't put this line in there, which is at the very beginning of the graphic novel, which it's where he confesses the fact that he's a fraudulent psychic. And he has the line, "I made it all up and it came true anyway." That's the funny part. And it's like, that is pretty critical to the themes of the story, but also you do see some of that expressed in the film. It's just botched in terms of trying to flesh out Sir William Withy Gull's motives, because they don't really go into the whole Masonic stuff or into the male supremacy aspects or anything like that.
I feel like it's there. It's not like
it's just buried relative to what it should be.
Right. Now, one thing that you do see thematically that's really, really strong, and this like really strong, that I actually do enjoy about the film, is that it does not hold back in showing that when the people in power feel threatened, they can and will use the tools at their disposal to stay in power.
Oh yeah.
And this one, it's always been kind of a weird little thought of, if this was such a famous case. It was such a brutal case. It did capture the public's imagination. It's just weird on the one hand that it was never solved. But on the other hand, if there were people in power who had a vested interest in it never being solved, during that time period, they could have made stuff simply go away.
They could have pulled it off a lot easier at that time than they could today, which it's interesting because I watched recently the entirety of The People versus O.J. Simpson American Crime Story, which a fantastic series if you've ever seen it. But because there was another famous murder case, albeit one murder of two people, but one instance captured the public's imagination in a totally different way, totally different time period, ended in a way that people didn't expect, and gets talked about even today because it did capture the public imagination, continues to fascinate, all that stuff. But it was more so about, the person that, was very, very, very identifiable the end result wasn't what we thought, versus someone whose identity was never determined. And what did this say about the societies at the time and all that stuff? They're both pretty fascinating to think about.
Well,
because in both cases, you had a lot of phony leads. You had a lot of people trying to get famous off of the backs of these dead people and that kind of stuff. There are a lot of surprising parallels.
Well, and I think that's evident in there was this writing on the wall that was apparently from someone who was just trying to get some fame, and that's one thing that Aberline was trying to tell the dude that
the Jews are the people that will not be blamed for nothing. It was very, very poor grammar, if I recall. And that's
actually a true story.
It is.
But I'm sure you know a little bit more about it.
There's been some dispute as to whether Jack the Ripper, whether he left that there or whether that was graffiti that was already there, and it just the killing happened to take place right underneath it. It's been some dispute. That's one of those things that's never going to be solved either way, largely because they like they did in the film, they did wipe it off, and it actually was for the reasons that he stated, which was that they thought it would further inflame the anti-Semitic attitudes of Whitechapel, because there were a lot of Jewish immigrants in the Whitechapel area at the time.
Well, and at the time, there was a heck of a huge news news community.
Yes.
Where people relied on what happened in the newspaper a lot.
Yeah,
there was probably a newsy boy on every corner.
That's right. Well, that's why I compared it to the O.J. Simpson case, because that was at the dawn of what we now call the 24-hour news cycle in its truest sense. The Jack the Ripper case, newspapers had existed, but it wasn't
extra. Read all about it. Ripper strikes again.
Yeah, well, this really kind of made the value of the newspaper as a way to get the latest and the sleaziest and the dirtiest information that was happening in your backyard right now. That this case really did help kind of make that concept for the newspaper much more concrete.
Oh yeah, most assuredly. Now, um, what did you guys think about the aspect? It seemed to me that this film was trying to push the idea that grapes were essential in the essential leading on of the women. Do you think that the grapes and the drinks and stuff that was offered to the victims, do you think that could have been like a reality?
Well, that assumes that the killer was of high society, which I that was a I had a lot of issues with the adaptation process, obviously, but that was one of the ones that I was like, that was a little too obvious, because that's such an obvious through line, in a way that it's like, well, what? So the precision of the earlier murders and the fact that the killer has anatomical knowledge and that kind of stuff, all of that wasn't good enough for you. You had to lay it on even thicker like that. Now one of the girls that were killed, one of the prostitutes in the graphic novel, is seduced by grapes and drink and stuff. It's not a through line in the way that it is here. If indeed the real Jack the Ripper, if indeed that person was of high societal stature, which again is probably not the most likely, but if he was, then sure, it's probably not out of the realm of possibility that he could have used grapes and drink to, lure the girls in. It's more likely that he was just kind of a frustrated commoner who happened to be like a butcher or a taxidermist or something like that.
Well, and ultimately, Inspector Aberline, he came to the conclusion because of how methodically displaced the organs were, and this and that they at least had some common knowledge of surgery. It had to be someone who knew doctor like things. And ultimately, that's why he went to his police commissioner and was like, "Hey, I think it may actually be a doctor or some of that stature." Is you're preposterous. That's bullshit. Let's stick with something. Let's go with it. And
Yeah.
he appears to be one of those detectives that is not going to just quit at that. He's going to be thorough, and he ends up going onwards and tries to attempt to talk to the London's most respected surgeon, who
Yeah,
just so happens to.
Sir William Wythe Gull. Now, both the graphic novel and this film get something accurate, which was the fact that the real Sir William Wythe Gull, around the time of the killings, had suffered a stroke. He was retired. And part of the reason why he's been so heavily discredited as the Ripper is because of the stroke, because he was pretty old at the time. Probably would not have been physically capable of carrying out the killings. Now, the graphic novel does kind of use that to its advantage by saying that his seizure event was a way for him to receive a vision from a god-like figure that the conspiratorial version of the Freemasons worship, called Jabulon, which that vision, brings about, he gets a vision of what the 20th century will look like, and he feels like he has to undergo these ritualistic murders in order to bring about the 20th century. And his theory in the graphic novel is that the 20th century as a vision of it, and it turns out to be an accurate vision of how the 20th century really did turn out. But like he has to bring it about, and he has to do it through these ritualistic murders, and they have to be done in a very specific way in order to assure male domination over women, because that's like his whole big thesis. What was so eerie, which again they didn't really do in the film, but like there's a scene where he and his coachman, John Netley, a real person, he has John Netley drive him all over London, different points of London, and he gives like it's kind of a long, rather tedious chapter where he gives a lot of like architectural lessons and stuff about different buildings that all have rather Masonic elements to them, and apparently those buildings that he brings up that they were built by Freemasons and have like obelisks and Masonic symbols and stuff. But he has him drive him around, and then he draws it out on a map, and it's a pentacle shape, and like a magical pentacle shape, kind of carving out his territory, magically speaking, and he trying to have the killings, correspond to these points and that kind of stuff, and you're like, holy shit. Which again, that's why his motives are so half-assed in the film version, because you don't really get that. You get like a vague notion.
You get it. You get it in that whole Inspector Aberline confronts Gull in that final like scene before he goes and offs what who he thinks is Mary Kelly, and it comes out. Most of it actually in that whole scene, what he does, and then that whole vision that you're talking about, I think that's kind of what that whole scene in front of the people who are judging him from the Masonic
which now that scene is in the graphic novel too, the part where they're judging him and he's lost his sanity and that kind of stuff, because he, in the graphic novel, and they theorize that the real Jack the Ripper, whoever he was, that the person's sanity would have gradually deteriorated because the penmanship of the Dear Boss and whatever the second letter was, and then the From Hell letter, the progression of the handwriting of those letters deteriorates over time. So the person was clearly losing it, if indeed it was a singular killer. And Sir William Wythe Gull, in the story, his sanity does indeed deteriorate over time. And so that whole scene where he's being judged or whatever, that is actually in the graphic novel. And, you do see his sanity slipping as he is moving closer and closer to accomplishing his mission. It's just, again, it's half-assed relative to what it should be. And when he's saying that, years from now, people will look back and say that I gave birth to the 20th century, that's kind of sort of what he said in the graphic novel. He said it a lot better, his line there is, the 20th century, for better or worse, I have delivered it, which that was Alan Moore's whole thesis, was that the Jack the Ripper murders kind of did give birth to the 20th century, but the murders were kind of like a ghastly midwife, is what he called them. And I thought that was a good phrasing of it.
Okay.
But
one aspect of this film that I thought that you would appreciate, Dane, is when Inspector Aberline goes to that initial doctor thing, they present to the audience
the Elephant Man,
John Marrow.
Yes.
Or John Merrick.
Yes. Which I was very surprised that the Elephant Man, because he does appear in the graphic novel, because Joseph Merrick, which I like that they refer to him by his correct name, and then they default to his incorrect name, which was his more widely known name for a long time, John Merrick. Which I actually was like, hey, good for you. That was actually accurate to the mistake that perpetuated for so long. But the real Elephant Man, the real Joseph Merrick, was in London at that time, in real life, and there's a scene in the graphic novel where Sir William Withigull actually meets him, and the dialogue balloons, he had a hard time speaking in real life, and they do the way that they spell it. You spell each of the words in the dialogue balloons. You can kind of hear his speech impediment in your head, and I was like, hey, that was really good. I was surprised that he made it into the film because, again, he's so kind of tangential to the plot in both versions. But I was pleased that he did make it in, and that the makeup looked really damn good. So they obviously modeled it after the Elephant Man film makeup, which was modeled after the real life Elephant Man's look. But I was like, hey, good for that. That out of all the elements from the graphic novel, that actually made it in there. But the real Elephant Man was in London at that time, so I think, hey, that was pretty cool. And same with the Wild West shows, Native Americans, all that stuff. That actually did go on at the time, also.
Which is kind of why the police commissioner was like, "Well, I'm much more thinking that one of these characters would have been will probably be your culprit in hand. So look to these."
And one of those guys apparently was one of the many, 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 many suspects. I mean, the suspect list for Jack the Ripper is huge.
Yes.
Kind of uselessly huge, in fact. But yeah, apparently one of those guys was one of the suspects, and then also a suspect that I'm sure could make up its own conspiratorial Jack the Ripper movie. Some people have theorized that it was H.H. Holmes, the American serial killer, who was in London at that time.
There's even a conspiracy theory that I've heard of that eventually Jack the Ripper became the Boston Strangler, and I'm not sure how that essentially came about, but I've heard that theory before.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's why, again, like I'm so anti-conspiracy theory in real life, but I do fully understand, like, as a fictional device or whatever, how good that is, especially when you are, say, Alan Moore, and you're using it as a vehicle for larger commentary on society and that kind of stuff. That's how you do that sort of thing well in the realm of fiction. And this, to me, the film, like, it feels like it is a Hollywoodification and trying to appeal to people that don't really know the history or don't really care about it. And what you end up getting is kind of a standard conspiracy murder mystery kind of thing, as opposed to like that vehicle for so larger societal implications and stuff, which the Jack the Ripper murders were.
And the possibility that Mary Kelly actually survived the whole matter.
Yeah, which now there's kind of a weird. My favorite part of the graphic novel, it does touch on the possibility of that being true, although it's not as explicit as it is here. And I don't want to say too much about exactly why. That's one of my favorite parts because it's very metaphysical, and I don't want to spoil it for Jake, but it touches on different aspects of, like, not only metaphysics but also just like time theories and that kind of stuff. It's very cerebral, but yeah, that was an interesting aspect to it that's in both versions. It's just more metaphysical in the graphic novel than it is here.
So ultimately, Inspector Aberline has ultimately by the end of this whole thing, he's kind of figured everything thing out to a certain degree, at least according to most of the theories. How he comes about it is very methodical, at least to me. See, I didn't know before going into this film, first off, how inaccurate this was to the graphic novel, and how well I knew at the end of the film that it wasn't it wasn't historically accurate either, but it did cater to some of the theories that I have thought were evolved, looking at the Ripper case itself, and if it went in that direction.
That theory does predate the graphic novel, so Alan Moore did not come up with it himself.
Correct. Now, one thing that is interesting about the film, if you've watched it before and you come back to it, knowing where the story ultimately goes, it's interesting watching the conversations between Aberline and Gull, where Gull is being very accommodating. He gives them some very good information. He's very open. He gives them a lot of to go on. And he almost looks like he's really enjoying the conversations.
Yeah.
And then when they finally have that final confrontation where Aberline finally tips his hand that he suspects it's Gull, that scene I think was handled very well, and the two of them acted it out very well.
Now I'll say this. So that scene where they're meeting each other and they're conversing, and he is being very forthcoming and everything, like that's not in the graphic novel, but I do think that was handled very well, and I think that Ian Holm played it very well. If you're gonna structure it as your conventional whodunit, I think that was done very well. Plus, there's a good red herring with the prince has syphilis and that kind of stuff.
Right.
All of that was handled very well. And when Sir William Wythe Gull reveals who he really is, I think acting-wise, he is able to play that well. I did take issue with the kind of campiness of the blacked-out eyes and stuff.
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed that. Although, on the other hand, I could see him also say, "It's mine. It came to me."
Exactly.
I think.
And again, same year as not only Harry Potter, same year as Fellowship of the Ring, which he was in. So, very magical year.
Bilbo Baggins.
I forgot. Yeah, I forgot he was the elder Bilbo. I'd forgotten all about that. Yeah.
Well, but the blacked out eyes, I was like, he probably would have played that just as effectively, if not more effectively, without the enhancements.
I think he had the skill to do it without that. It was an interesting touch, but I don't think it was needed.
Yeah, it was a little much. Now, again, this is kind of a visually stylized film, and that's one of the strongest things about it.
Now, I did when I first watched this, because I was so excited about seeing this movie. I didn't get as negative as I guess some of the rest of you guys did on it the first time watching it, and I watched the extras on the double disc DVD that they had at the time, and they were showing how very similar the scenery was to the graphic novel. So,
I know they tried for that.
There are very much similarities in style and structure, especially when it comes to the stagecoach scenes of the graphic novel. If you saw them back to back, they did try to.
They did. I mean, now there's some differences. Well, in not only structure and everything. Now they did, but not only that, but the graphic novel is done in black and white, and it is done in the style of what a lot of the earliest kind of London newspaper in the wake of not really having they had photographs and stuff, but they did a lot in the way of some supplemental illustrations and not so much political cartoons in the way we think of today, but some supplemental illustrations and stuff. They're done in that style, and I didn't know that until later. But if you look at them side by side, you're like, oh, so that's why it's designed that way. Now this one is in color, which is not surprising, But within that, they do some really cool, stylish, like red skies. They have. I liked the just as a stylistic thing. I thought the green flames on the carriage was cool. It did kind of make you wonder, like, how on earth did they do that in that time period? But as a just purely aesthetically, I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool looking. I did like the knife sound when the steps for the carriage when they lowered. I thought that was kind of a cool touch.
Okay. Now, ultimately, what did you all think about the whole fact that Mary Kelly actually survived this whole?
Which again, like the graphic novel, the way that it's explained there is much more metaphysical and much more. It's not anywhere near as literal in the sense that it's here. Which again, I can't really explain it without spoiling one of my favorite scenes in the thing. But the way it's done here, it's sort of like, forced Hollywood happy ending. The way that it's done in the graphic novel is not. It's not meant to be a happy ending per se. It's more so just an aspect of a larger.
Wasn't such a happy ending for Aberline.
Nah, that's. But again, that's kind of weird because the real Aberline, he lived to be an old man, and he retired and everything. Which again, that's one of the best aspects of the graphic novel, because like again, the real guy did live to be an old man in like the early 20th century, and he did like retire, he did that sort of stuff, and it's really cool. Like in the opening and closing of the graphic novel, you see this kind of bitter, beaten down old man who uncovered this conspiracy but was powerless to stop it. And it's like, how do you live with that? Which again, that's very similar to Watchmen, where you uncover this conspiracy and yet you're powerless to stop it because of X, Y, and Z factor. And they play that up really nicely. The fact that he dies is just like, what, But again, it's like that person is just a whole other character. Really, he's not even really. They should have just named him something else. Because he really has nothing to do with the real Aberline.
So
that's nothing against Johnny Depp whatsoever, because I think he does a pretty darn good job in this. It's just he plays another character who happens to share the name of this real person.
And Robbie Coltrane as a character, he really I think he kind of like holds up the movie. Most of it. So, in any case, let's get to our favorites. Or let's talk about. Well, we did talk about production a little bit, didn't we?
Oh yeah.
So actually, one production note that I just got to mention, because again, Dane, your comment about how British the film is, I just found that interesting that the majority of the film was actually filmed in and around Prague in the Czech Republic.
Well, more so that the source material, like the original crime and the graphic novel, are about as British as can be. But yeah, it was, and predominantly Americans filming in Prague, and it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, apparently, I have not watched this, but apparently there was a very critically acclaimed BBC miniseries starring the one and only Michael Caine as Inspector Aberline. And that was called Jack the Ripper, and it was done in 1988 to coincide with the centennial of the murders. And apparently that one, which again, that predated From Hell, but it did go by the now discredited Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, Sir William Whitehall conspiracy theory. Apparently it did go by that, but it did a lot of its homework much more thoroughly in terms of like who people actually were and their proper ages and their proper motivations, blah 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 blah. outside of the whole conspiracy theorist angle, but like for the most part, it was apparently it hit more of the correct points and that kind of stuff, which I would love to see that. I have it on my list, but as far as like the production, yeah, I think easily the strongest thing about the thing is the fact that it's visually stunning. It's very well edited. It's very slick. It feels like the best yeah, I was going to say it feels like a music video, but I don't mean that as a put down. I mean that as a compliment. I think it's the good aspects of what music videos are able to do. And especially during those trippy dream sequences, which again are not really in the graphic novel in the way that they're here. Like it has plenty of trippiness in it, but it's not due to absinthe. But those are in and of themselves are very well done. They're very visually imaginative. The compositing of the like red skyline and the trying to fake Prague for London.
Well, that one scene where the sky was red, that was a pretty stunning image. It was like it was pretty fun.
And this is something I didn't know about. Apparently, there were some real atmospheric phenomena in the skies of London at the time that could give off a red sky illusion. Apparently, I'd have to.
It's all that pollution.
Yeah, exactly. Because there was so much crap in the air because of all the factories and stuff. But like, apparently, the sky could look red sometimes, which I will need to double check and make sure that's true. But I read that relatively recently. Yeah, I do think easily the strongest thing about it, despite as an adaptation on the script level, I think it's pretty half-assed, but the visuals are very strong. The pacing is very. I think it moves pretty well. The killings are done surprisingly rather tastefully, all things considered. Which again, the killings in real life and in the graphic novel, not tasteful, and they did get progressively more gruesome, especially like towards the end, which the graphic novel does not shy away from just how gruesome a lot of the final killings were because of like peeling off someone's face and like mutilating them, all this stuff. And it's like it shows it in pretty horrific detail, albeit illustrated. This was surprisingly tasteful for a Jack the Ripper story.
So let's get to our favorite scenes here of the film. If there was a favorite scene, Dane, what or scenes? What would you take from this film?
Oh boy, no, I think that for sure on the visual / atmospheric side, all of the Jackie Boy prowling the streets in the carriage and all that stuff, that was all very visually strong. I actually really love the opening, how that was a big long take where you see all the different levels of like drunkenness and prostitution and crime and stuff all on the street. That was like a big long take. I thought that was done very effectively. And again, even though it was not in the graphic novel anywhere, I thought that the scenes where you see Abeline and Sir William Whitey-Gull talking to each other, assuming that one is going to approach it as a more conventional whodunit, those were handled pretty well. It was by the time that Abeline and in the graphic novel, when he and what's his face, Robert James Lees, when they go to confront him together, by that time it's too late, and by that time he just outright confesses, "Yeah, I did it," and that's it. You're too late, and it's not like he's being boastful. It's just like, yeah, I accomplished my goal. That's it. But I do think if you're going to construct it in a more conventional way, then yeah, those were handled pretty well.
Okay. What about you, Jake? If there was a favorite scene from this particular film, what would you take from it?
I would probably I'd probably have to concur that the scenes between Aberlin and Gull were very effective. I think the first time I saw it, I was a little bit surprised to learn that he was indeed the killer. So I think the movie handled that well, and just the interplay between the two of them, and most of the scenes with Robbie Coltrane, especially the ones where he were cursing, just because it amused me so.
Yeah.
And again, that image of the red sky with the chapel in front of it, that was a striking image. And there were a couple of other images like that scattered throughout that really I thought were very excellently done.
Yeah.
So those will probably be the ones that stick to mind, come to mind for me.
You did see in those scenes there, you did see a little bit of what was expounded upon very heavily in the graphic
Right.
novel, which was like you saw some buildings that did have Masonic origins to them, because the Freemasons, again, they've been unfairly maligned through much of history because of their secrecy and blah blah blah, which again is largely bunk. But like the one thing that is undeniable is that, well, a lot of influential people all over the world have been Freemasons. A lot of them, like people that helped found the United States of America, like George Washington and that kind of stuff. Not to mention that they have built a lot of very important ancient, or not ancient, very important old buildings that were influenced by ancient buildings, like specifically like anything that has like an obelisk or whatever that has some kind of ancient Egyptian ties, that also has Freemason ties. There are a lot of real Freemason buildings that they helped to build, and you saw some of that in some of those scenes you mentioned, but they go into much more detail about that and the supposed occult significance of that, which again, that part's kind of dodgy, but yeah, the Freemasons did build a lot of very important buildings in both the UK and the US.
Right.
I would have to say that one of my favorite scenes I gotta go with is I kind of enjoy the Annie Crook sex scene. A little bit. There's something about looking at the naked hindsight of a woman that is just naked, daring, and just striding and riding her cowboy boy.
Hindsight is 2020, you might say.
her scenes with Martin Freeman in Love Actually are among my favorites in that movie, partly for that reason, but they're also just really cute.
But it wasn't until this viewing that I thought of the Ninth Gate with that particular scene.
Yeah.
So
did you say Martin Freeman?
Huh?
Did you say Martin Freeman?
Yeah.
Well, so you got young Bilbo and old Bilbo. How about that?
So yeah, she's been in movies with both Bilbos. Yeah. luckily, they did not have her do such a scene with old Bilbo.
The other scene I would have to say is I kind of get a kick out of what they do to Gull in the end. For some reason, the Justice, even though I know it's a cloak and dagger routine, that their supposedly government or in the name of Queen and freedom, so to speak, covered up this whole shenanigan, at least allegedly. I do believe that he does kind of get his undue justice with the lobotomy, and for some reason, I enjoy the controversy of the of the Freemasonry whenever it comes up in anything. If anything, let's just blame it on the Freemasons.
And people have through much of history, very kind of unjustly, because you dig deeper into that sort of thing and you realize just how much of it is based in nonsense. And a lot of the supposed secrecy of Freemasonry is largely superficial in nature, because like I think it was the Simpsons making fun of that whole thing with the stonecutters. That's a bit more accurate to what actually goes on. Just people getting wasted and trying to have a boys' club, basically.
Right.
But in any case, let's see. Is there anything with the music per se that anyone noticed?
Music was all right, which apparently our newly disgraced Marilyn Manson was supposed to have a much greater role in the music side of things, but it was not able to be done in terms of scheduling, and so a remix of The Nobodies, his song, was in the end credits. And I know that at around that time, Marilyn was trying to get more in the realm of film scoring, which he did eventually do with Resident Evil, the first one.
Well, Trevor Jones is the composer of the music, and I guess he was the composer of The Last of the Mohicans.
That's correct.
Which
Before
is kind of funny. The
Hughes
Brothers originally thought for Gull, the character. They originally thought that Daniel Day-Lewis would be a contender for that role.
I thought he was
would have been pretty. That would have been pretty damn cool.
No, actually, no. It was Aberline that they wanted Daniel Day-Lewis. Gull, I think they wanted
Sean Connery.
Well, Day-Lewis, then Connery, but Gull, they originally wanted Nigel Hawthorne, but he got sick before they were able to make the film, so they went to Ian Holm.
I think Daniel Day-Lewis or Sean Connery would have been awesome.
Right. They would have been more appropriate to how you described Aberline, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Which
apparently was that was the way the guy was. He was middle-aged, he was portly, he was, that sort of thing. He was not Johnny Depp in his heyday.
Alrighty. So on that note, let's wrap it up here. So Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm Dane Kyle. I'm a filmmaker. I'm on a few different YouTube channels, Indie Horror Film Creative and No Money Film School, which I haven't visited in a while. Doing that, trying to get another short film going, trying to, continually navigate the stresses of real life during the continued pandemic time. All kinds of fun stuff.
Alrighty, and what about you, Jake? What is it that you do?
Well, I'm a movie, TV, comic, music, whatever, media collector here in Central Virginia. I'm co-host of the YouTube channel Septum Sin vs. World. Septum had to leave a little early tonight, and honestly, I thought about joining, but I thought I'd hang in for the long haul. And it was a long haul tonight. We apologize, folks, but anyone that's stuck with us, it's awesome.
You had to go off and fight the world.
We've got a video that we recorded last night, giving our predictions for the Oscar nominations, which come out next week. We'll be doing a reaction podcast next week for that. We do pickup and new releases videos, and that's usually a good time. And Dave, do you want to do next week's, or should I go ahead and mention them?
Go ahead and mention them, because I'm not exactly quite sure what's next week.
I'm almost sure I remember. Brandon usually has this stuff at his hands, but I believe it's Popeye and Snowpiercer. Does that sound correct?
I think you're right.
Yeah, so next week we will continue with this lovely theme. Pretty sure it's with Popeye and Snowpiercer, but
quite the double feature there.
Indeed.
Those two totally go together.
We got a film,
Right.
a film by Robert
Like
Altman
birds
from
of a feather.
1980, and a film by Bong Joon-ho from 2015, I believe.
Yeah,
Slightly different, but two master directors.
in their own respect, and one of them
Yes.
based on a comic strip,
Yeah.
a classic newspaper comic strip turned into animated cartoons and that kind of stuff, and then the other one based on a comic book.
Alrighty.
All right.
So I am David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore, where we go on and discuss films of all natures, and we just have fun doing it. And we end up driving ourselves into the night with some of these. So hopefully you've enjoyed our hard struggle with going into the early hours of the night doing this for you. So thank you for listening. But I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where we also have discussions of the same nature. I also do video pickups of my own, which I have one to unleash once I do a couple more reviews, and also reviews, which I eventually need to get back into doing. I miss doing it. But in any case, thank you for listening. Have a great day, evening, and morning. And I would say keep your lights on and your doors closed, because you never know if the Ripper might be coming near you.
He might be knocking on your door to say you need to read the original Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell graphic novel because it's well worth your time.
Which, by the way, I actually bought while we were having this discussion. So hopefully I'll get it in like 2 days, and I'll read it and see if it changes my position.
Please do. And I've said this before. It's like if you haven't read the graphic novel and if you don't really know or care about the case, you'll probably enjoy the movie fine. You could do a whole lot worse, but it's like if you do compare it to the graphic novel and to the real life case, it's doomed, completely doomed.
Doomed.
Doomed. Scrooge, you're doomed for no, wrong movie.
Okay. Right.
That was the 1840s there, David, not the 1880s.